Think about the last game you played. Whether it was a hyper-realistic shooter on a high-end PC or a simple puzzle on your phone, that experience is the result of 50 years of relentless engineering. We've gone from moving two white rectangles on a black screen to exploring infinite, photorealistic universes. But how did we get here? Why did some companies like Nintendo survive for decades while giants like Atari and Sega vanished from the hardware race? The history of consoles isn't just a list of boxes, it's a story of corporate espionage, technological leaps, and the struggle to define what fun looks like in a digital age. Today, we are breaking down the history of video game consoles into 7 distinct levels. We'll look at the bits, the blast processing, and the secret chips that defined our childhoods. We are going from the wood-paneled living rooms of the 70s to the massive data centers of the future. This is the evolution of the console. This is the explained learner. Level 1, the analog pioneers, 1972 to 1980. Level 1 is where the spark was lit, the first generation. Most people think the Atari 2600 was the first console, but the real pioneer was the Magnavox Odyssey, released in 1972. It was designed by Ralph Baer, the father of video games. This machine didn't have a processor in the modern sense. It didn't even have sound. It was so primitive that it couldn't display colors or even keep track of the score. To play, you had to physically tape plastic overlays onto your glass TV screen to create the illusion of a tennis court or a haunted house. This was the era of dedicated consoles. You couldn't swap out games. The game was hardwired into the machine's circuitry. If you bought a Pong machine, you played Pong until the day it broke. During this period, over 900 different companies tried to make their own Pong clones. It was a chaotic, unregulated Wild West of electronics. There was no AI to play against. If you didn't have a friend sitting next to you, the console was useless. It was a time of pure analog simplicity, where the graphics were just glowing dots of light and the controllers were often just knobs you twisted to move your paddle. But the foundation for everything we see today was laid in these silent, flickering boxes. Level 2, the cartridge revolution and the crash, 1976 to 1983. Level 2 changed everything by introducing the microprocessor. This was the second generation, led by the legendary Atari 2600, originally called the Atari VCS. For the first time, the console was a flexible computer, and the games were stored on ROM cartridges. This meant you didn't have to buy a new machine for every game. You just swapped the plastic slab. This was the birth of the software industry as we know it. Suddenly, hits like Space Invaders, Pitfall, and Pac-Man were in every living room. This era also introduced the third-party developer. Before this, only the console maker made the games, but then a group of disgruntled Atari employees left to form Activision, the world's first independent game publisher. However, Level 2 also saw the video game crash of 1983. Because Atari didn't control who could make games for their system, the market was flooded with terrible, low-quality software. The most famous failure was E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which was so bad that Atari allegedly buried millions of unsold copies in a New Mexico landfill. Retailers lost faith. Prices plummeted from $35 to $5, and the world thought video games were a dying fad. The industry in North America was declared dead until a toy company from Japan decided to gamble everything. Level 3, the 8-bit resurrection, 1983 to 1990. Level 3 is the resurrection. While America was giving up on games, Nintendo was perfecting the Famicom, which they brought to the West as the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES. To avoid the video game stigma, they marketed it as an entertainment system and included a robot named ROB to make it look like a toy. The NES brought us into the 8-bit era. This doesn't just mean more colors, it means side-scrolling. Before the NES, most games took place on a single static screen. Now the world could move horizontally, allowing for massive adventures like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. Nintendo introduced the lockout chip, which gave them total control over who could publish games on their system, preventing the garbage flood that killed Atari. During this time, the Sega Master System arrived, offering more powerful 8-bit hardware and a broader color palette. This was the start of the console wars. Nintendo held a near monopoly, often using aggressive contracts to keep developers away from Sega. This generation proved that video games weren't just a toy, they were a new form of digital storytelling. If you wanted to see the future of the medium, you had to choose a side, Team Red or Team Blue. Level 4, the 16-bit War and Blast Processing, 1987 to 1995. Level 4 is often called the Golden Age. The fourth generation saw the jump to 16-bit graphics, and the rivalry between the Super Nintendo, SNES, and the Sega Genesis became the stuff of legend. Sega realized they couldn't beat Nintendo by being family-friendly, so they targeted teenagers. Their slogan, "Sega does what Nintendo don't." They famously marketed blast processing, a term they essentially invented to describe the Genesis's higher CPU clock speed, which allowed for the lightning-fast movement in Sonic the Hedgehog. Nintendo countered with Mode 7, a specialized hardware feature in the SNES that allowed a 2D map to be rotated and scaled in real time. This gave us the pseudo 3D perspective seen in F-Zero and Super Mario Kart. The hardware was being pushed to its absolute breaking point. This era also introduced specialized chips inside the cartridges themselves, like the Super FX chip, which allowed the SNES to render actual 3D polygons in Star Fox. But behind the scenes, a massive shift was happening. Sony and Nintendo were actually working together on a CD-ROM add-on for the SNES. At the last second, Nintendo publicly betrayed Sony, canceling the deal. Infuriated, Sony decided to take their research and build their own console. Level 4 wasn't just about the games, it was about the birth of a new rival that would eventually conquer the world. Level 5, the 3D leap, 1993 to 2002. Level 5 is the most dramatic shift in history, the fifth generation. We moved from flat 2D sprites to 3D polygons. This was the era of the Sony PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and the Nintendo 64. Storage shifted from expensive cartridges to cheap CD-ROMs. A cartridge could hold about 12 megabytes, a CD could hold 650. This allowed for full-motion video, FMV, voice acting, and orchestral soundtracks. The PlayStation became a phenomenon because it was easy to program for and appeal to an older audience. Meanwhile, Nintendo made a critical mistake. They stuck with cartridges for the N64. They argued that loading screens on CDs would ruin the experience. While the N64 was technically more powerful and introduced anti-aliasing to smooth out jagged edges, the lack of storage space meant developers like Square, creators of Final Fantasy, jumped ship to Sony. This generation introduced analog sticks and DualShock vibration, changing how we interacted with 3D space. It was the end for Sega's dominance as the Saturn struggled with complex hardware that was hard to code for. Gaming was no longer a hobby for kids. It was a cinematic, multi-billion-dollar industry that was now out-earning Hollywood movies. Level 6, the Multimedia Hub, 1998 to 2013. Level 6, the sixth generation, is where consoles stopped being toys and became entertainment centers. The PlayStation 2 became the best-selling console of all time, largely because it included a built-in DVD player. In 2000, a standalone DVD player cost $400, but a PS2 cost $299. Families bought it for movies and ended up becoming gamers by accident. This era also saw a new player enter the ring, Microsoft with the Xbox. It was essentially a PC in a box featuring a built-in hard drive, no more memory cards, and an Ethernet port. While Nintendo was focusing on local multiplayer with the GameCube and its 4 controller ports, Microsoft was building Xbox Live. This was the birth of modern online gaming. The console war was no longer fought on the playground. It was fought across fiber optic cables. Technically, this generation introduced programmable shaders, allowing for realistic water, shadows, and lighting effects. We saw the final gasp of Sega with the Dreamcast, a console ahead of its time with a built-in modem, which unfortunately failed to compete with the PS2's DVD hype. Level 6 was about the convergence of tech, where your console was your movie player, your music box, and your gateway to a global community. Level 7, the final hardware generation, 2005 to present. Level 7 brings us to the present, the 7th, 8th, and 9th generations. We move from high definition to 4K and from spinning hard drives to ultra-fast SSDs. Consoles like the PS3 introduced the cell processor, a piece of tech so complex that the US Air Force actually used a cluster of 1,700 PS3s to build a supercomputer. But as we look at the PS5 and Xbox Series X, we are seeing a shift away from the box itself. With cloud gaming, the actual hardware is a server miles away. You just need a screen and a fast internet connection. We are moving toward a console-less world. Will the Generation 10 boxes ever even exist? Or will the explained learner of the future be talking about how we used to buy plastic boxes to sit under our TVs, from the silent paddles of the Odyssey to the ray tracing of the PS5? The journey has been about one thing: the human desire to play. Which console defined your childhood? Let me know in the comments. This is the Explained Learner, and I'll see you in the next level.